Hi everyone. We're going to go ahead and get started. Welcome to Content Migrations Don't Have to Be a Nightmare. My name is Lisa Collins. I'm the Director of Production at Toyota Creative.
I'm Sam Harper, Vice President of Delivery.
And thank you all for joining us at 3 o'clock on this Wednesday afternoon. Today we are talking about content migrations. And so before we get started, wanted to see a quick show of hands. Who all here is a project manager? And do we have any developers? And do we have any designers? Sales folks? Anyone else that I didn't account for? Ooh, content. Oh, all right. Great. And then show of hands, who is from a digital agency? All right. And then do we have people from the federal space?
Absolutely.
All right. So we're coming at this presentation from a digital agency mindset, but it is relevant to the federal space. You might not, when we talk about clients and client education, you can probably think about that in terms of talking to your project teams and other people within your organization. So content migrations. I think for project managers, we consider content migrations the least fun and most difficult part of a website redesign. And I think that when we think about it, it probably comes down to, as project managers, we feel like we know the least in the room. We have the developers who are doing the content migration and the technical aspect, and then we have our clients, and they're the content owners and the subject matter experts. So as project managers, we think we know the least in the room, and we're just going to keep our mouths shut and maybe not ask the questions that we should. And so we were finding at Toyota that this was happening a lot, and a lot of our content migrations weren't going as great as they could. And so one of the things that we shifted in the past 6 months was really allowing project managers to be the owners of the content migrations and empowering them and giving them the tools and processes and documents that they need in order to make our content migrations more successful. And so that's really what this presentation is about, and we'll get into that shortly. Quick agenda for you all. We'll go into what's the problem, stories of migrations past, types of migrations really quickly, and then how we improved our process. And then we'll end with a Sam joke. Every staff meeting, Sam does a dad joke that no one laughs at, but we have one for 3 o'clock on a
So what's the problem? In general, we have websites that have become sort of libraries, and they have slowly accumulated content over years and years and years. And in general, I think what we're finding is that we're working on web properties from sort of somewhere between 2008 and 2011-12, and that's when they launched, and so they've sort of slowly built up huge repositories of information. This is a website for DC Water. And so we built them a great looking new website, but then somebody has to figure out what to do with all those press releases and documents, resources, all of that stuff that is built up over time. And I think one of our biggest problems is the client impression is that it should be something like copying and pasting. We've all drug a folder from one place to the other, and it all shows up. And then maybe if there's 2 of something, it asks you if you want to skip that one. And so that's what the clients or what some people expect. Or they expect that some very smart person will type in a bunch of code, and then it'll run this thing. Somebody says, we're going to run a script. And that's going to fix all of our problems. And so as long as the script does whatever the script does, everything will end up on the other side. And in reality, neither of these things are really how content migrations work. And our firm, as Lisa said, was going through, and time after time we were doing our post-project debrief, and we were finding that we were giving ourselves really good grades on a lot of different things, and then really poor grades on content migrations. And when we were trying to figure out why was it behind or over budget, we were pointing back over and over to content migrations. So what you're going to find out here is nothing that you don't know. I think our biggest message is the realization that you have to take a very deliberate approach to content migrations, or you're going to continue to make the same mistakes over and over. So welcome to our nightmare. A couple of stories about migrations past. We have done a lot of different migrations as a firm. And there are different times where we thought we were more prepared for success. And a good example is Drupal to Drupal. So a project that we were going into, there were 10,000 nodes, but it was a Drupal site. That was great. We thought that we were prepared for success. And then even worse, and I say worse in a weird way, the client gave us access to the environment before we sold them. And so deep in the migration, they said, we gave you access. Why didn't you know that this was going to be so hard? And they were right. But the site had tremendous problems. This is just a list of some of the content that we ended up migrating. But it was a poorly structured site. There was 28 different content types. There probably should have been 12 or 15, which is what we consolidated it down to. But that led to all kinds of issues. So there was consolidating the content types, combining things, merging taxonomy terms. There was embedded HTML. It was a huge challenge. And so Drupal to Drupal can be difficult. Drupal upgrades 6 to 7, 7 to 8, oftentimes are really big content migration challenges. So it is something that just because it's Drupal to Drupal doesn't always make it easy. Custom and old sites to cold fusion. This is what we spent a lot of time doing. The person says, we're coming from a proprietary site, we have a cold fusion site, we need off, Drupal is great. And so we spent a lot of time moving off. This is just some content mapping that we did on a giant site. There was election ballots. They have the largest repository of election ballots in the world. And it was our challenge that there were so many ballots, we couldn't change the content structure. But we had to get it out of a site core site. And so we had weeks of effort into just pulling the data out of the site before we could import it. And so exporting content can always be difficult. We have never once seen a proprietary system that had an export button just sort of neatly built in, like, stop paying me license fees and go to an open source platform. That's always the last thing that they're ever going to build, because content lock and vendor lock is what they keep making money on. Mapping fields, cleaning data, all of these challenges abound when you're doing any of these types of migrations. And finally, WordPress to Drupal. These are actually some of our most successful projects. I think it's because of the nature of the WordPress sites. They're typically simpler. A lot of times we have clients who they have a proprietary mess and then a WordPress blog, and they want to move the blog over, where the blog content is simpler, it's more straightforward. So those WordPress migrations typically go better, but they still are exposed to all the same problems. So all of this is to say that through all of these experiences, we've gained a lot of knowledge about how we can do things better. So Lisa's going to speak to some more about both the types of migrations and how we help solve this problem.
Sure. So before we get into how we solve the problem, real quickly, types of migrations, 3 different types. A fully automated migration where every piece of content is programmatically migrated over. This is obviously the largest level of effort, and you very rarely see this. Manual migration where everything is done manual, and then partially automated migration where a good portion of the content is programmatically migrated over, but there still is a manual component there. And I would say about 90% of our clients fall into that third category. So how did we improve content migrations? The biggest thing is it starts with documentation and planning, and particularly it starts with client education. We were finding that we were saying content migrations and what content do you want to migrate, and we'll write a script and it'll all be good. But our clients had unrealistic and too high expectations for this. And so we actually decided what we were going to do is put together a content migration document that we send over to the client and ask for them to read. We obviously have conversations with them. We start talking to them at the kickoff about content migrations. And we talk to them about content migrations throughout the entire very beginning of the project so they know what's going on. But having everything that they should know and what's involved in content migrations in a document, we found has been really helpful. And so just a quick overview of what's in this document. We talk about 3 different types of migrations. We often most of our clients, we're not exactly sure which route we're going to have to take depending on if we've had access to their current content structure. So we're clear that these are the 3 different types, and we still need to go through a process to figure out which type and approach we're going to have for you. And then we talk about what kind of content should we migrate. And there's a couple of different angles you can take here. At Teoti, we generally encourage our clients to think about the content that we should programmatically migrate over. And when I say what content should we migrate, it's not should we migrate it or not. What content should we programmatically migrate over? And typically we say, think about the amount of content you have. Do you have 500 blog posts and 10 FAQs? Okay, let's focus on this 500 blog posts. Find your structured content, blog posts, news items, resources, where there's more than just a title and a body. If the content is structured already, it's going to be better to flow into Drupal through a programmatic migration. And then just in general, this is not rocket science here, but think about, look at your Google Analytics, look at your top 100 pages that have been viewed over the past year, and take a look at that, and then also put date rules around what content you're bringing over. So let's say you're programmatically migrating over all of the blog posts, but you don't want to bring anything beyond 2015. You want to keep it really new, but there's a blog post from 2012 that's in the top 50 most viewed. Well, if you're not bringing that over programmatically, make a note to manually migrate it over. And so it's really important to look at Google Analytics and help your clients figure out what type of content they should bring over. And I will say every organization is different, and they have different reasons for bringing over some content and not bringing over others. So there's no hard and fast rules there. We also give them a list of our technical considerations, and I actually don't know if the clients really read this, but it's helpful for them to know that it's not as easy as they think. And if we have questions for them or are going through difficulties, it's not because it's not just a press a button and go. And then we talk about our own internal process and what our expectations are for the client, particularly in the QA process. We talk about how we QA the content, and we'll get into that later. But it's also up to the clients as the content owners to QA the content as well, and not just assume everything we did is perfect, because they are the content owners in the end. And then the next thing to do is to document the process internally, which also sounds like a dumb moment, but we were finding that at Teoti we have all of these seasoned developers and all of these seasoned PMs, and everybody just assumed that everybody has done this 15 times, and we didn't have to necessarily have those really tedious and granular checklists, but we do. And so don't be afraid to use checklists and documents internally. So we have checklists in our project management tool called Teamwork. And then we also created a central document for developers and project managers to refer to throughout the entire content migration process. Project managers and developers work together to come up with this. And there's a lot in here. It just talks about our process again. But I think the most important thing is the technical checklist that we have here. When you're so in the weeds on doing these content migrations, we'll find that, oh my gosh, we forgot to do the 301 redirects, which, you would think that you would not forget that, but when you're so in the weeds and there's 50,000 things happening with a content migration and a web redesign in general, things fall through the cracks. So this allows us to make sure nothing really falls through the cracks. And then finally, things to remember. We sat down and we thought about what was the reason for all of our failures, if you will, on content migrations in the past, and we wrote down all of the pitfalls that we had so that we don't make the same mistake twice, and that we continue to improve moving forward. And this is a living document that we'll update as we inevitably probably will come across something else that we haven't thought of, and we'll add that here. And of course, get access to the client's current content early. We ask for access before our kickoff call, actually. It's our welcome to Teoti client email, and we ask for access then so that we're not waiting around, because sometimes it can take a while to get access to that current content, and we want to start our technical audit early. And then we want to plan the technical approach once we have access to that content. And we want to document this plan. And this was another turning point for us, because we have our sales documents that it has a little section in the sales document that says you have X amount of hours and we're going to do a content migration. And the client just assumes that we're going to migrate all the content within those hours and it's all going to be fine. But, you know, there's a lot more to that. So we put together what we call our content migration plan documents. And in this document, we reiterate our approach that was sold in the sales phase. And we define our proposed solution. Is it partially automated? Is it manual? What did we figure out in the technical audit? And then we specify which content will and won't be migrated. And this is important to also say what won't be migrated. So say we're migrating all the news and the blogs and the press releases, but we're not migrating over basic content pages. We specify that. And then it's also important within the content that you are migrating over, are there new fields in the Drupal site that will require a client to go in and manually clean up or tag? So if there's new blog categories, for example, that weren't there in the old site, and we're obviously not going to read every blog post and figure out what category it fits in. If it's up to the client to do that, we want to point that out there so that everybody's expectations are clear. And then we reiterate the QA process and what the client's responsibilities are there. And then we get physical sign-off, where they physically have to sign a piece of paper and scan it and send it back.
No, this is, it's, you know, it might seem like an insignificant point, but it was part of, you know, making sure that the clients understood that if they found something way late in the process that they also wanted to migrate, that wasn't part of the content migration plan. And I think this is important in the government space too, even if you're not working with an external team, that you've got product owners or you've got deadlines to meet. And one way for a site to never launch is to continue to find more and more old content that you want to migrate over. And so I think that this, giving the physical sign-off and agreement on the content migration plan is really, really important.
All right, are you feeling better? Great. So, you know, we thought it would be helpful to kind of to go through some of the things that we keep track of, some of the things that we've messed up, and hopefully that you can learn some of the lessons without going through them. And first and foremost is don't make the same mistake twice. That content migrations are difficult. I did this. You watch it for an hour, and he keeps doing this. But that there are things, and there are mistakes that you'll make, and there are expensive mistakes that you'll make. But just trying to make sure that you're getting better every time. And the only way for you to get better is to start documenting these things and putting them in a central repository, so every migration gets a little bit better. Another thing is to talk early. Like I said, we talk about content migrations with our clients in the very beginning, at the kickoff, and in our weekly check-in meetings with those clients. We continue to talk about content migrations. It's not the most fun part to talk about, but everybody starts to get used to the content migration discussion, and it's much simpler to go from there.
All right, do you want to take a picture of that?
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Okay.
And then set realistic client expectations. So, a couple of things here. Obviously, with the programmatic migration, hopefully that document that they have to sign off on will set the expectations of what exactly they're going to get. But another example is I'm working with a client where we had to eventually just do a manual migration. There was no programmatic migration happening, but because we had set the expectation up front that this was a possibility, they were fine with it. On the other hand, a year and a half ago, it was the same exact thing. We ended up having to do a manual migration. It was probably always on the table, but we were a little afraid to say that. And then when we finally did say we have to do a manual migration, she brought us both into her office to talk about it. She was not happy. So her expectations were not set, and had we set them from the beginning, we would not have had to have that difficult conversation with our client.
Exporting content is hard, and it's something that developers, cover your ears, don't trust your developers. They will always hope that it is easier than it is. They will tell you that it's just data, we're going to be able to pull it out. But there are real challenges. In particular, when you're going from a proprietary platform, and especially a Microsoft platform, they abstract the data in lots of different tables, and just piecing it back together can be incredibly difficult. So, it's something that, as Lisa said, we do test very, very early. And then be skeptical of the test. A recent project we worked on, we exported a couple hundred nodes. We imported them into a blank Drupal site. Everything was great. Well, there was thousands and thousands of nodes, and we didn't notice that any of the files weren't importing properly. So files, images, you want to make sure that you're getting a real broad base of content when you're doing tests, whether you're exporting or importing. And then really looking at the details, because it's easy to say there was 500 nodes, there's 500 nodes, everything's great, and no one's looking at the details, and it's those details where you're going to run into problems.
It's my favorite one. Trimming content makes sense, obviously. The whole point of a website redesign is to start fresh and new, and if you're just bringing over all of your old content into your new site, it's just going to be prettier, but it's still going to have that weight and that bloat that we don't necessarily want in the new website. So trimming content makes sense.
But this is one of the things, actually, the keynote today said, Brian, was to be empathetic to the authors. I always try to remind our team that somebody worked that day after Thanksgiving to Sunday to put a report out, and they care a great deal about it. Or somebody poured their heart and soul into a white paper, or they wrote a blog post that they care a great deal about. So you have to be empathetic to them as well. That there are sometimes times where you want to say throw everything away, but that's not necessarily the reality of it. And so you want to make sure that you're moving things in a smart way, but also being realistic about the needs of the folks who created the content.
And then I touched on this a little bit before. Focus on the large. When we say large, we mean a large amount of structured content pages to migrate over. So again, those are those blog posts and those news items and those press releases. If you think about maybe the current site and the About Us section, and there's the About Us, and then there's the mission, and then there's the history, and then the people. At least at Teoti, Eric does a great job at designing beautiful custom About Us landing pages. And so it doesn't make sense to programmatically migrate over this content when it just, A, needs to be rewritten and reformatted, and B, it's going to live in completely different places than just a basic page. It's going to live in a landing page. It's going to live in a little history slider. So that's why we try to focus on the large amount of content that was sort of a moment in time that won't have to be rewritten and will probably live in the same place. That's the content to programmatically migrate over.
So CSS and HTML in your body content block is the enemy. Once again, developers, close your ears. They're going to tell you they can write a script that will strip out the HTML. They're not telling the truth. It never quite seems to work as easy because that HTML is essential to making the page look the way it did. And so even if you try to do it in a smart way, it's very, very difficult to write scripts that pull out HTML or CSS. Do people know what I'm talking about here?
Yes.
That they're creating a look and feel that's custom on an individual page-by-page basis. When you put it in the new site, it doesn't know how to react. And so anytime that you've got this embedded HTML, it creates all kinds of havoc. And this is true also of the QA time. I think a lot of times when we're thinking about how long a project's going to take, we're not factoring in as much QA time. And so if you have stripped out HTML on a page-by-page basis, you essentially have to QA on a page-by-page basis. And so if you're talking about even 250 pieces of content, that's hours and hours and hours of QA work. Hard-coded links, also the enemy. This is in particular, this is a link as it should be formatted. Internal link, so the site knows where to go, versus putting the whole link into a link field. And so if you have this type of thing, you're going to end up with broken links all over your site. And so it's critical that you're paying attention to this and possibly having to write some scripts to strip out absolute links. References and link content are also exponentially more complicated. So in this example, we've got a bunch of blog posts over here with titles and a taxonomy of the different card types. And so we've tagged those 2 blog posts with the taxonomy term convertible. Well, we've got another one, buying guides. On our blog post, we like to show the most relevant buying guide. So we're going to link the convertible buying guide. If we want to now move over these blog posts and these buying guides in a way that's linked, this is a lot more complicated. So anytime that you're referencing one piece of content to another, the work that goes into the content migration is exponentially more. Some other examples, if you've got blog authors, you have a bunch of users you want to move over and they're linked to the blog post they wrote, maintaining those relationships can be very, very difficult. It also starts to affect the order of operations. So in this case, we need to move over taxonomy terms first, and then we can move over the blog post and the buying guides. But if we haven't already put the taxonomy terms into the system, then when we load all of those blog posts, the tags aren't going to come in properly. This is true over and over again. In my other example about authors, we want to move the authors in, put all the users in, and then move over the blog posts that are associated with them. But the order of operations and link content gets a lot more complicated, and so it's something to be very mindful of. Any questions about this? Does this make sense?
And then you want to count the nodes before, the number of nodes that you're programmatically migrating over before, during, and after. So you have 500 nodes that we're migrating over. During the testing, how many nodes were migrated over? I can't tell you how many times we as project managers, I'm guilty of it, have been like, okay, I see hundreds, we must have all 500, but there was one little thing that made 50 of those nodes missing. So truly do count how many nodes you were starting with and how many you ended up with, and not just estimate and assume because there's hundreds, they're all there, because they're not always. And then finally, manual content entry shouldn't feel dumb. Like I said, I'm working with a client right now. We started talking about the content migrations in the very beginning. They had all of our documents that they could read and figure out why maybe a programmatic migration wasn't going to be good for them given the hours that they have budgeted for a migration. And we proposed to them that we were going to do a manual migration, and they didn't even have one question for it. They were just like, okay, sounds good. So I think if you set client expectations early, oftentimes the manual migration is the best and most responsible route, and hopefully they're okay with it as long as you have been talking to them about it all the way through, and this isn't a total surprise to them.
So to round up, just a couple of quick reminders. Make sure that you understand the challenge, that your project owners or product owners understand the challenge, or your clients understand the challenge.
And then document and standardize. I think that's a lot of what this session is about, is that we thought that we didn't necessarily need those documents and standardization, but with things like content migrations, just go ahead and do those documents and go ahead and standardize. I know a lot of people don't like SOPs and whatnot, but they help in some cases, and in this case, it really has helped and it really has improved our content migrations.
And then finally, empower the project managers. Somebody really should own the content migration, and in our experience, developers should be part of the team, but not necessarily in charge of the team. That there's a lot of things and that project managers do well in terms of document, checklist, keep track of details. And so while there might be some developers out there who are excellent at managing their own migrations, we have really discovered that it's not as technical as you'd think. There are technical pieces of it, but it's really a challenge of workflow and process. And so that's a natural project to be led by a project manager. And so don't be intimidated by the challenge, and instead empower the project managers to lead. So who is excited? SpongeBob is excited. What questions do people have? Sure.
Yeah. So for content, for a situation where the client really wants to migrate the content and also dramatically redesign it, do you find that the manual approach tends to be preferred for that set of content, or does it depend?
So in case people are watching at home, the question was about when you're going to migrate content and then rewrite it or reorganize it.
Yeah, I would say it depends on what the future Drupal structure is going to be like, and does it need to go in separate fields. If the client wants to get a head start, they can either rewrite the content on their current site if they want to do that, or start saving things in Word documents. But at the point where they're saving things in Word documents or Excel, it should be a manual migration. So it really depends on the future Drupal structure and if they want to get a head start.
Thanks.
Just a comment. In the last big migration that we had, something that we did to keep the project managers more engaged and more visibility on the migration was that we were kind of dividing the project in these workable lines of action. So like, for example, go be able to create an event and visualize the events. And in that way, we were working the migrations of events at the same time as design and other parts of development were happening. And so we will have proper demos around the migrations and other things like that. It's a little bit more complicated because, I mean, you're managing, you're doing something more agile, which is more flexible, but you can get into trouble if you're not timing things correctly. But it did help us in being able to see problems with the migrations early and being able to fix them.
Yeah, for people who do work in agile sprints, migrations are a terrific thing to structure in that way because you're not, one of the most dangerous things is to think that you're just around the corner from everything coming over, because that's rarely the way that it all shakes out. A lot of times you're addressing content type by content type challenges. And so if you've got a developer who's like, I've got it on my local, don't trust them. Who knows what's on their local? But that what you want is to do exactly what he said, which is let's move all the events over, let's QA it, let's make sure we're good, and then let's move on to the blog post. It's a much better way of doing the migration.
Have you had much experience with when tagging searches and trying to, because sometimes search terms change, you know, a lot of people just, they go to a site, they don't want to browse, they're just searching, and what happens to that?
What do you mean by tagging search?
Like having the right metadata, you check to make sure people are having the right metadata for their pages, or have you done much of that?
Yeah, I mean, most of the search that we're doing right now, I mean, it's all based on either Solr indexes or Drupal core search indexes. So the metadata isn't quite as important as the actual content itself. But yeah, I think that we will pull over whatever metadata exists in content and store that as well. And a lot of times that stuff, especially if it's not visible, you know, you can kind of pull over some stuff and leave it more alone and hope it enhances your search. Sure.
Do you guys have any favorite modules for helping clients do content cleanup? I know, like, taxonomy managers, when we use a lot to help clients kind of merge or trim down their taxonomies. Any other favorites?
I think the other one would be views bulk operations.
That's what I was going to say.
Yeah, that it's a module that allows you to query out large groups of content and then make wholesale changes. But it's one module you want to be very careful about. You want to take a big content backup before you do anything, because there ain't no going back. There's no Control Z on that. You can't just undo. But yeah, that's another one. Any other questions? Well, thanks for hanging with us. Yeah, we have a joke. You're not, I was going to do the closing and then the joke. People must be so distracted. No, thank you for hanging with us. If you have any questions about content migrations or want to know a little bit more about some of the documentation we put together, we would be happy to chat after. Again, I'm Sam. This is Lisa. We're at TOD Creative. And we will now end with a terrific Sam joke. What do you call a man without a nose or a body? Nobody knows.